An abandoned town hidden deep in the Appalachian Rust Belt, Poage, Kentucky, harbors secrets so dark they've been erased from history. At least that's what the authorities want you to believe. Once a booming city, Poage fell to ruin after the terror of the Boyd County Cutthroat, a ruthless serial killer who tore apart lives and left the town drowning in fear, forcing residents to flee. The city is now a ghostly memory, but for one survivor's child, the horror isn't over yet. Find out why Poage disappeared, and why you should pray you never find its remnants. Poage, Kentucky, by Dead Internet Chronicles. It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink, and listen. Part 1. Hidden deep in the hills of the Appalachian Rust Belt is an abandoned city that I pray to God you never find. Once a thriving metropolis, Poage, Kentucky holds a treasure trove of dark secrets and sinister mysteries. The singular city in Boyd County, Poage was once a manufacturing giant and burgeoning hub for technology in northeastern Kentucky, but it all came crashing down that fateful fall in 1986. When a series of gruesome murders took place at the hands of a serial killer dubbed the Boyd County Cutthroat, causing a moral panic and leading to the forced evacuation of the city. It's unlikely that you'll ever find any information on the city. I know you've probably already opened Google to fact-check my claims, but please know that the existence of this city has quite literally been scrubbed from the internet, and for good reason. I only became aware of its existence a few weeks ago, and I was having a conversation with my parents about the manner in which they'd met. They were evacuees of Poage. They met at the high school in 1984 and fell in love shortly after. My father was a star athlete and my mother was the captain of the cheerleading squad. It's a bit of a cliche story, but they were the stereotypical high school sweethearts, and they found themselves stuck in the middle of a regional zeitgeist that struck fear into the hearts of many. It was a Friday night in October, and the lights shone bright on Bobcat Stadium. Kernels popping at the concession stand produced a pleasant aroma. Air horns radiated throughout the jam-packed stadium. Routines from the cheerleading squad echoed throughout the night, and a thunderous roar erupted when my dad caught a touchdown pass with 45 seconds to go in the game, putting the Bobcats up by 3 points. They were playing the county school, their heated rival, and it was homecoming night. High school sports were a religion in Poage. The fathers, living vicariously through their sons' accomplishments and reliving their glory days, ferociously followed the team, and the mothers were just proud to say, that's my baby out there. A working town that skewed older. There wasn't much else to do in Poage besides raise a family. The streets weren't filled with boisterous bars, and the entertainment options including past their prime musical acts from 2 generations prior. Sports were all they had in that place, and they wore their Letterman jackets with pride. The kicker booted the ball into the other end zone, and the runner was off, evading tackles like a gazelle and leaping through the air like a hyena. He was tackled at the 40-yard line, and only 34 seconds remained. Tension filled the stadium. Fans from both sides of the field were shouting, and by this point the entire audience was standing, their eyes glued to the field, paying no mind to the playing children and the unenthusiastic weirdos. My father, lining up at cornerback, knew that he had to make the biggest play of his life in order to win this game and cement his place in Poage history. The rattlers reverberated throughout the stands. The cheerleaders, now turned to the field and away from the crowd, looked on as the quarterback for Boyd County screamed in the huddle, laser-focused on creating his own legacy. Hearts were pounding. The spectators stomped and hollered, and the offense hurried to the line of scrimmage. Clapping his hands twice, the lineman snapped the ball into the quarterback's hands, and he dropped back. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. The clock was running, and his receivers ran their regular routes. My dad followed his man. It was a shot for the end zone. The quarterback hurled the ball through the air, the pigskin swirling rapidly, and for a moment, Bobcat Stadium fell silent. Audible gasps emerged from the silence, and in a moment of weakness, my dad caught a glimpse of him, the Boyd County Cutthroat. Standing in the tunnel adjacent to the field, the man held a sinister grin and a victim in his hands. The blonde-haired teenager, an outcast at Poage High School, was overpowered by his natural strength, and she let out a loud wail when he held the knife to her throat. Well, my dad, in his moment of weakness and concern, lost his man, allowing him an easy catch and path to the end zone, while the opposing crowd exploded in excitement. Boyd County had scored a touchdown, and my dad was to blame for the loss. His coach ran to him, ripping him to shreds, while my dad pointed to the tunnel in fear and dismay, hoping to catch the attention of anyone who would listen to him. But it didn't matter. The coach, knowing that the lack of discipline would surely lead to their loss, tore him apart, while the Boyd County Cutthroat sliced her throat and evaded the scene, leaving the body behind and disappearing into the night. My defeated dad, damned for his lack of awareness on the play, sat down on the silver bench. Despondent and downtrodden, he knew that nobody cared about what he'd seen, but he also knew that he had witnessed it, and argued with his coach and teammates who believed him to be delusional. Nobody ever believes a kid, not when this much was on the line. Well, despite his accomplishments, he was benched for the remainder of the game, and Poage failed to complete another comeback. Disappointment swept over the faces of the Poage fans, which turned to disgust and appallment in the moments after. With the focus being shifted to post-game activities, the body was found as the team entered the tunnel to head to the locker room, and word spread swiftly like a contagion. Poage had lost to their bitter rival, but there was a new social pariah in town now. A mad mob was forming, their faces red with anger and their guns in hand. Now, believing his words, the authorities would visit my dad shortly after he left the stadium. They interrogated him, and my dad provided the best description that he could. The man with his long black hair, his thick-rimmed glasses, and his goatee would prove difficult to find. In a town of 234,000 people, and in an era of hair metal, it could have been anybody, and the police set out an investigation to find him. Mayor Chuck Woolery put out a statement in the Poage Press the next morning, mourning the loss of the teenager and declaring a citywide curfew effective immediately. The newspaper had dubbed the killer the Boyd County Cutthroat, and a sense of paranoia was pestering the townspeople. Churches were full that following Sunday morning. The citizens, serious about their faith, believed that they could pray the evil forces away. The uneasy feeling didn't budge. A growing sense of dread filled the sky like a cloud of smog, and city leaders debated the necessary actions to take. The police force was fully staffed and fully loaded, ready to obliterate anyone willing to step in their way. They patrolled endlessly throughout the night, but somehow he always managed to slip through the cracks, and over the course of the following 2 weeks, 11 more murders took place. A pattern had emerged. The killer was monitoring the local mall, preying on young women for unknown reasons, and his meticulous manner of murder had sent the city into a full-blown panic. Slicing their throats from ear to ear, his signature style had struck terror into Poage, and a fearful fleet of families were beginning to flee the town in droves. Houses went up for sale as the outrage boiled over into disaster. Hotels in the nearby cities were illuminating their no-vacancy signs as the fathers fought for limited living quarters, the inns being temporary solutions to a permanent problem. The Boyd County Cutthroat was here to stay, and the ripple effect was real. The economy of Poage was rapidly collapsing, and the police force was losing officers at a concerning rate. Those policemen, too, had to protect their families. The city, losing money at an alarming pace, grew unable to utilize its non-existent resources to protect its citizens. The jobs followed, as companies closed their doors and moved their operations elsewhere. The bottom had fallen out of Poage, yet many found themselves unable to relocate, stuck in their hellish home, hoping to end the madness that they were trapped in. Poage's population had halved itself in 2 weeks, and the press was playing damage control. In a town of sudden lawlessness, the citizens of Poage were growing concerned at a new trend. A cavalcade of copycat killers was now coming forth, creating chaos in the streets. The mayor, surrendering all hope, declared a state of emergency, and the National Guard was brought into the city. A forced evacuation was taking place. The troops rounded up every single citizen in the city limits and commanded their relocation. Boyd was now a legitimate ghost town, guarded by a group of troops, while the plummeting press was unable to cover the unfolding events. The state government prevented the publications from publishing the story. My parents and their sets of parents had been relocated to Columbus, Ohio, and there were no talks in that town of the events taking place. Quite literally, no traces of it happening. It had been effectively memory holed in an attempt to sanitize the state's image, and discussions of the events were forcibly shut down in any way possible. Meanwhile, the Boyd County Cutthroat was still at large, and presumed to be hiding in his home in the rural parts of the county. His thirst for blood had been neutered by the evacuations. My parents eventually married, and I was born years later in Columbus, which is about 2 hours north of Poage, a place that my parents never talk about. They say that it's too traumatic to discuss, but I sometimes wonder if that's truly the case, or if they're still afraid of the authorities punishing them for providing me the details. Sometimes I can get happy memories out of them, like when they discuss their childhoods and the playgrounds they used to frequent as children. I don't press them for details too often, but something came over me recently, and I felt a yearning to form a deeper connection with them through stories of their younger years. I suppose this would be a good time to introduce myself. I'm Cole, and I'm a 25-year-old photographer still living in Columbus. I got into photography at a young age when my parents bought me my first point-and-shoot camera, and I took that thing everywhere with me. I took pictures of everything. People, places, you name it, and I was shooting it. Well, this hobby turned into a legitimate passion in my teenage years, and I started shooting concerts for local musicians in the area, as well as the occasional wedding. But I grew to resent the art form when I started doing it for money. Something didn't seem right about charging people for pictures that they could take themselves, and in general I felt scummy. So I quit photography and fell out of it for a few years. I picked it back up again in an attempt to find my purpose. I was codependent when I met my girlfriend, and after a few months I felt like I was starting to smother her. Needing an outlet and a way to give her space, I turned back to photography, this time refusing to take photos of people, but rather places. Architecture and nature are my go-to subjects. I run an Instagram page with quite a large following. They call it the new topographics movement, and my work has been well received by users of the platform. I found, however, that there are only so many things you can shoot in your hometown before you start to get bored. Columbus is a big city, but it has a small town feel to it, and since I've lived here for my entire life, I'd started to feel creatively drained. My conversation with my parents a few weeks ago sparked something in me, though. I felt a calling to cross the Ohio River into the city my parents once called home. An explorer at heart, and not a fearful one at that, I'd become obsessive over Poage, deeming it to be the perfect place to revitalize my creativity and cover a subject that was virtually unknown on Instagram. I decided to drive down there one weekend evening on a whim. My girlfriend, as frightened as she is, decided against going with me. She claimed she didn't like the aura that the place was giving off, and she begged and pleaded with me not to go. She wasn't sure what would happen to me, and I wasn't sure what would happen to me either. But unlike her, I enjoyed that thrill. I reveled in the excitement of being in new, uncharted territory. I couldn't fathom that the Boyd County Cutthroat was still actually around. 1986 was almost 40 years ago, and he was surely in his 70s by now, if he even was still alive at all. Even then, he could have had a change of heart and renounced his actions. The only way I could ever know was if I went and discovered it for myself. And so, I did. Part 2. I started my route down US 23, which is a flat and boring highway with cornfields as far as the eye can see. About an hour into the route is when you start to see the Appalachian terrain take fold and the rolling hills form. It was 7 p.m. on an October night, and the sun was starting to set. I was antsy and pushing 70 in a 55-mile-an-hour zone, ready to get there and explore the ghost town for myself. Well, with second thoughts creeping in, I kept on driving, knowing I'd already committed this much time and effort to my adventure. I was starting to feel an uneasiness in my bones, as if the hills wanted me out. The amount of cars slowly and then quickly dwindled, until I was the only driver on the pitch-black highway. Unable to see much in the darkness, I realized after passing a few signs that I'd missed my route. I was supposed to take Ohio State Route 823, a bypass of the depressed city of Portsmouth, but I failed to see the sign for it and kept blazing past it. We didn't add too much time or distance to my commute, but I was forced to enter Portsmouth and witness the economic disparity evident in their crumbling buildings and drug-addicted population. Rolling through the crumbling city, I noticed a strange phenomenon in the sky. Indeed, it was a duo of red lights flying quickly overhead, pacing back and forth in a weird pattern, seeming to follow my car. In the night sky, all I could see was those lights. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but curiosity turned to fear as I started to wonder whether or not I was really welcome in this area. I exited Portsmouth and passed Wheelersburg, now on US 52, and the factory smells wafted into my nasal cavities as I crept down the highway. The darkness was deafening, and I read the billboards as I blasted down the highway. I was approaching my destination, and the growing knot in my stomach started to become worrisome. I saw a strange billboard about 15 minutes away from the bridge that enters Poage. It read, "Turn around." All capital letters, no image, nothing else except for a black background in a red sans-serif font with a white stroke. Menacing, I'd say, but nothing was going to stop me from getting to this abandoned city. Then I saw the buildings. There weren't any skyscrapers in Poage, but there were 2 buildings that were about 13 stories tall, and they towered over the rest of them. Unusually, I noticed that the lights were still on. From an outside perspective, it didn't look like this city was abandoned at all, and curiosity creeped over my face as I began to wonder exactly why the lights were still on. Well, if nobody lived there. The only thing revealing the town's emptiness was the lack of motor vehicles entering or exiting the city. I've been to small towns before, and even in the middle of the night when the citizens are sound asleep, you can usually see a few tractor trailers traveling on the road, making their deliveries and getting out of Dodge. Here, there was nothing. No trucks, no cars, and no noise coming from across the river. It was eerily silent, and I hit my turn signal to diverge from the highway and enter the exit ramp splitting from the left lane of the highway. Orange and white traffic cones greeted me about halfway up the exit ramp, and I just stopped my car slamming into the concrete barricade that was blocking the entrance to the grey cantilever bridge. Nicknamed the Old Ben, this bridge was antiquated and dilapidated. I turned off my engine, and its rumbling halted into silence. An October night, it was cold enough to warrant wearing a hoodie and jeans. Repping my hometown, the Blue Jackets hoodie was thick and heavy, but the cotton was keeping me warm as I felt the uneasiness sweep back over me. The river was mostly vacant, other than a large barge that was meandering underneath the bridge as I was walking across. The bridge itself felt unsafe. The wind was wildly whipping through the steel structure, creating a whistling noise that penetrated my eardrums like a rail spike. I looked down over the side of the pedestrian walkway built into the old bridge and saw a slew of workers slaving away on the ship. They could see me too, and I noticed the confusion and concern on their faces as they shouted unintelligible gibberish at me. Perhaps they were aware of the impending doom that I was determined to face. But as I shouted back at them, the boat floated out of range for me to make any possible explanation to them. I continued my journey across the old bend, snapping shots of the solemn structure and gripping my camera tight. Since the bridge was dark, I was shooting with a high ISO and found myself displeased with the noise of the photographs I was taking. But I knew that I could clear up the noise in processing, so I kept on shooting, ignorant to the rest of my surroundings. I could feel it though. I felt the sensation of being watched, as if there was a pair of eyes focused on me from a distance. I couldn't tell where the sensation was coming from, and as a large bird flew over the bridge, my face grew grim and shifty. I figured that I had street smarts, and that I was always watching my back. I continued trudging across the bridge. I was about to enter the city when I noticed a strange sign along the concrete walkway. The wind was settling, and I was now standing over top of the main thoroughfare through the downtown area. I stopped to examine the display, and I reasoned that it was a list of rules to follow. It only had 3 rules written on the red sign, and they were as follows. 1. Never enter alone. 2. Never enter at night. 3. Leave everything exactly how you found it. Along the bottom of the sign was a clear plastic display holding a few foldable paper maps. They'd clearly seen better days. The colors were faded from years in the sweltering sun, and the typeface was retro, reading, "Welcome to Poage," and showing pictures of the near non-existent notable attractions in town, including a picture of the Paramount Theatre, a trio of statues along the town's riverfront area, and a mall that was once new and exciting, yet had withered away as the emptiness set in. I grabbed a map and continued my way into the desolate downtown. The billboards were exactly how they must have looked in 1986. An advertisement for aerobics classes at the Poage town centre stood out to me, their neon leotards and crimped-out hair being the focus of the photograph. I stepped onto the pavement and read the street sign. It was Winchester Avenue. On my left was a dilapidated liquor store, and on my right was an old church with a massive white steeple, the symbolism of which I'd rather not explore. The boarded-up building was withering away, and I wondered about all the people who'd walked into that sanctuary for Sunday service. Where are they now? As a non-religious man myself, I didn't care about the sanctity of the building, yet I felt a deep yearning for the days of old, a calling for simpler times and the softness of small-town life. In front of me was an old, decaying diner. A wooden sign was standing firmly in front of the facade reading, "The Poage Pantry, home-cooked meals since 1941. I'd never heard my parents mention the restaurant, but I snapped a few photos of it anyway, examining my work and heading into the establishment. I walked into the mildewy manor, the scent of lingering dead air hitting me like a skunk bomb in a perfume shop, and the cobwebs created an eerie atmosphere. I waded my way through them, their stickiness attaching them to my arms, and I started shooting again. I made my way around the vacant diner, examining the tables and countertop area. And lining the bar was a dozen plates of half-finished food, the drink cups situated alongside them. Some had fallen over and moved places, but it was clear to me that this evacuation happened suddenly and without warning. I thought about the families that had been eating their meals when the evacuation happened. Well, you know the severity of the situation was real when the patrons never even got to finish their dinner. I kept looking up at some crumb-filled plates, and on the black and white checkered floor I noticed a round, dark spot. Upon closer inspection, I realized it was a pile of dried blood of some sort. I couldn't tell whether it was human or that of an animal, but the disgust overwhelmed me, and so I ventured into the back of the restaurant to get a closer look at how the business operated in less tech-dependent times. I'd previously been a restaurant worker myself, spending years in modern establishments, and I knew the business quite well, so it was fascinating to see how things were done in mom-and-pop stores without the convenience of today's technology. A few cooking stoves were cluttered in the corner, and what appeared to be a prep table continued from them. It was wooden, which was unusual to me. Stainless steel was a standard in today's times, but I guess in the 80s they didn't care. I noticed the tickets lined up on a metal wire, and a white apron lying on the grimy floor. It had a name etched into it. Etta. I thought about Etta, and whether or not she was still alive. Out of respect for her, I laid the apron back down on the floor, remembering the rules that I'd seen upon my entrance to the city. I looked back at the tickets along the line. I couldn't read much of their shorthand, but I could make out little bits and pieces of it. Well, I understood that ML stood for meatloaf, and everyone knows what BBQ means. As I was reading the tickets, a chilling breeze flowed through the air like a torrent, causing the tickets to sway in the wind, despite the front door being closed behind me. Odd. But these things happen sometimes, and I didn't think much of it. I walked to the large metal walk-in freezer, which was no longer operational, and opened the door. Dozens of tan, cardboard boxes lined the shelf walls of the freezer. They appeared to have been ravaged by some sort of animal, and most of them were empty except for the ones at the very top, which had rotted meat and maggot corpses surrounding them. And then, on the floor, I saw a small hole that had been dug through the wall. Racing out of it like a rocket to the moon was a cluster of razor-thin rats, each one carrying a piece of meat between its tiny teeth. I couldn't tell what the meat was, but it was fresh and fleshy, and their squeaking noises startled me, so I left the room in a hurry. But before I left, I took another look at the packaging of the boxes of meat. I wanted to remember any detail I could, so that I could impress my parents and spark their memories when I returned home to them. Typed in bold letters on the box was White's Meat Market, along with the animated caricature of a spotted cow. I wrote it down in my notebook and also snapped a picture of it in the low light, before scrambling out of the sinister kitchen. I ventured back out onto Winchester Avenue, a 4-lane thoroughfare. The stars in the night sky were still twinkling. The air was still crisp and chilly. The silence still surrounded me. I was completely alone in this time capsule, and I was loving every second of it. Flickering streetlights and fully operational stoplights whirred overhead. I could hear their ambient noises, almost like a faint humming, while the distant calls of birds and bugs sang a chorus in my ears. I'd never experienced silence like this in my life. Coming from such a large place, I wasn't used to just being alone. I felt a sense of freedom finding me. I could do whatever I wanted here, with no one to judge me. As I took some more photos on my camera, I heard a roaring in the distance. It was at the intersection of 13th Street and Winchester Avenue, and looking south towards the post office, I could hear the roaring getting closer and closer. Stunned, I kept watching and waiting for something to show up, but it never did, yet the sound grew more and more rowdy. It sounded like a race car, its engine blaring and blazing by me. But there was nothing there, no car that I could see. I could only hear it, its sounds shaking the ground below me, before a squealing of tires abruptly put a stop to the noise and the silence returned. Well, maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, who knows? I was here though, and I couldn't let my imagination stop me from fulfilling my mission. I walked down Winchester Avenue some more, and entered a building named Blue Ribbon Lanes. Well, I'd heard my parents mention Blue Ribbon Lanes before, and from my understanding it used to be the go-to spot for teenagers and young adults to spend their time. Bowling alleys were almost a thing of the past, but I always appreciated the aesthetic of them, and I knew that this was going to be a good spot to take some photos. My parents would surely appreciate the nostalgia that I was bringing them. As I was walking through the first hallway to enter the establishment, I could hear music playing. It was an eerie sound, an a cappella song with outdated audio quality. I knew it had to have been from the 1950s or earlier. In doing my later research, I was able to find out the name of the song. The song was Jubilee by an artist named Gene Ritchie, a folk singer from southeastern Kentucky. The song played on repeat, echoing throughout the empty bowling alley. It was haunting yet beautiful, and after a few minutes and multiple repeats of the song, I found myself singing along with its simple melody. I looked down the lanes. Along the backside of the wall was a very 1980s aesthetic. Bold colors, geometric patterns, and an overall sense of fun and optimism. The pin setters, oddly enough, were still operational and functioning. While there were no pins being set, the mechanical arms were still rising and lowering, their mechanical noises barely audible underneath the charming melody being played. I heard a chorus of laughter coming from the pool room, which was attached to the side of the main room. But it was pitch black, and curiosity mixed with fear as my eyebrows lifted themselves instinctually. I went to investigate the laughter. As I turned the light on, the laughter stopped abruptly. But at the same time, the fluorescent lights in the main room went out, and the lanes lit up in neon colors. Jubilee still played in the background as a black light came on. I started to panic, my breathing increasing in intensity and my heart racing. I was not alone in this place. It couldn't have been. But I didn't see anybody in here. But then again, I couldn't see much of anything other than the black light and neon. In a fearful moment, I sprinted to the door. I could feel that sense of being watched again, and this time it was amplified. The feeling was growing stronger the closer I got to the door, and I exited the building, nearly bursting through the glass doors in the process. Well, I couldn't take much more of it, and I decided that it was time to go. I hadn't explored nearly as much as I wanted to, but I knew that something wasn't right about this place. I knew that what they said was true. This place was haunted. This place was cursed by the evil that lurked in it nearly 40 years prior. I dashed across the empty avenue, heading to the old bend to get back into my car and evacuate the city. Part 3. As my legs began to quiver and my breathing intensified, I took a moment to stop and catch it. I was out of shape, sure, and I couldn't run long distances for much time at all. I hunched over, wheezing, feeling like I was dying. Well, I was dizzy and lightheaded, and the city spun around me. I waited for a moment and finally caught my breath, and began walking back to the bridge, when I noticed a strange creature sitting on top of it. It was a dark figure, resembling a massive bird, and its eyes glowed red. It had to have been nearly 6 feet tall, and it stood ominously, watching me from a distance. It was quite literally looking right at me, as if it was insinuating impending doom. I looked up at it, and it made a strange screeching noise before flying off into the night. I heard a cracking and popping noise coming from the bridge. The noises grew stronger, and a rumbling occurred as piece by piece the center of the bridge fell out from under it. Slowly, and then all at once, the bridge collapsed into the mighty Ohio River, its concrete and metal splashing the cold water. The cliffside across the river was pitch black, and the highway was empty. The bridge was gone, and I was unable to get to my car. I was trapped in Poage. I pulled out my cell phone, scrambling to find my girlfriend's name in my contact list. I hit the call button, my mind racing, and waited for an entire second before the call ended itself. I tried again, and the call ended itself once more. Tried to send her a text message, but the message never showed delivered. The progress bar was stuck, and I looked to the corner of my phone. I was without service, unable to reach her or anyone who could help me. I was stuck in this city with malevolent forces, and I felt a growing sense of defeat dampening my prior enthusiasm. I brainstormed for a moment, wondering how in the world I was going to get out of this place. I pulled out my map and began looking over it. Indeed, I could make my way down Winchester Avenue and cross the bridge into West Virginia, but it would be a long journey, and who knows what would happen in the meantime. At this point, photography was the least of my concerns. I'd stopped taking photos, fearful about looking into the viewfinder and finding a creature in the frame. I decided to start walking. I had no other choice. The air was growing colder, and the silence was beginning to creep up on me like a stalker. I passed the Paramount Theatre, recalling the story my parents had told me about the resident ghost, Paramount Joe. In normal circumstances, I would have stopped to explore the abandoned auditorium, but I couldn't. I had to keep walking and get the hell out of this wretched place. I heard a human noise in the distance. It was like a groaning of sorts, along with unintelligible gibberish. I kept walking, scanning the streets and being paranoid as hell. I walked past another church, a lingerie store, and the old Camayo arcade. Upon my arrival at the old bank building, which is one of the tallest buildings in Poage, I found an old man. Unnaturally thin, he was shirtless and sitting against the building, his ribcage visible and his long hair interrupted by a bald patch on the top of his head. He was in his own world, unaware of my existence, but I was happy to have found another human to help me in my escape. I walked up to him and tried to get his attention. He didn't budge, still mumbling words to himself that I couldn't quite make out. I kept shouting at him, eventually catching his attention, and he turned to me. His eyes were black and his face was pale. He looked shocked and confused. Well, he must have been homeless. Perhaps he was someone like me who had entered the city and found himself stuck in the maze. I told him that I needed help, that I needed to get out of this city and back to my hometown. He looked at me with his cold, dead eyes, before a grin grew on his wrinkled face, stating, "You can't leave. You're trapped here forever, unless you can stop this madness." The cryptic message left me confused and questioning his words. And I responded, "What do you mean, madness?" "This madness," he shouted. "The clock hands mock me, boy. They spin and spin, but never truly move forward. Beware the echoes of yesterday, for they may become your tomorrow." What did he mean by this statement? I could tell that time had surely moved for him, his advanced age evident in the state of his skin. I didn't respond, but merely walked away, continuing down Winchester Avenue and repeating his words over and over in my head. Was I stuck in a time loop, forever cursed to wander the remnants of this city, unable to find my way out? Well, I couldn't know for sure. I frantically paced the roads, trying to think of any possible solution to my dilemma. West Virginia seemed so far away, and my body was weak. I could feel my energy depleting, as if it was being sucked out of me like a vacuum. My fears grew. Looking over my back every 2 or 3 steps, I was worried that the man would follow me and attack me. But each time I looked, I found him in the same spot that he was in. I kept walking, my mind running a mile a minute, until he was out of sight, yet still lingering on my mind. His words haunted me, while the melody of Jubilee repeated in my head. I was now on 17th Street. The empty, decaying buildings were towering over me. Their windows, some of them open, some of them closed, whispered in the night. I kept looking around, and I found the home of the Poage Press. A 1-storied brick building. I was sure that I could find some relevant information within its walls, and so I entered. The door creaked and the air was stable. I could smell the scent of paper that the publication was printed on. A heavy aroma of cigarette smoke lined the walls. I made my way into the office and found several stacks of newspapers standing on the wooden desks. They were the editions from the day of the evacuation, their deliveries never being fulfilled. I glanced at the headline. "Poage to be evacuated today," it read. I did some more digging, diving deep into the stacks of paper that covered the dark desks. After reading for what felt like hours, I found something that caught my attention. It was a file folder titled TBCCT Letters. And inside of it was a series of communications received by the Poage press from the killer himself. I started reading them in chronological order, snapping photos of them with my camera to transcribe for this telling. October 16th, 1986. To the spineless cowards at the Poage Press. You pathetic excuses for journalists, hiding behind your desks, too afraid to print the truth. Woolery, that slimy snake, thinks he can get away with anything. He's been pulling the wool over your eyes since high school, remember? Stole my girl, that smug bastard. But I'll show him. I'll show them all. You think those girls just disappeared? Think again. They're gone because of him. Because of the filth he and his cronies swim in. Poage Plaza Hotel, that's where it all happens. Little girls, scared and alone, used like toys. Woolery's lining his pockets, and you're letting him. I gave you a chance. I spelled it out. Each body another message. But you're too blind, too gutless to see it. Fine, you want a story? I'll give you a story. If you don't print the truth about Woolery, his dirty deals, his sick games, the whole damn rotten operation, by next full moon, there'll be hell to pay. More girls will disappear, more blood will spill. This town will burn. You have one chance to do the right thing. Print the truth or pay the price. Tick tock. The Boyd County Cutthroat. The next letter revealed a more ominous motive. October 24, 1986. To the blind fools of the Poage Press. The blood flows, the fear grows, and still you see nothing. You print your headlines about random acts and isolated incidents. You parrot the lies of Woolery and his puppets. You think this is madness, the work of a lone lunatic. You're blind, every damn one of you. Poage is drowning in technology, machines whispering promises of progress, of efficiency. But they're lies. Those machines, they're stealing our souls, turning us into cogs in their cold, heartless system. Woolery, he's leading the charge, selling us all down the river. I'm showing you the truth. Each cut a scream against the digital darkness, each body a warning sign. But you refuse to see. You cling to your gadgets, your screens, your illusions of control. Wake up before it's too late, before the machines take over completely. Expose Woolery. Expose the truth about the tech giants, the ones pulling his strings. Show the people what's happening before we all become slaves to the circuits and wires. The clock is ticking, the blood is spilling. Will you finally open your eyes? The Boyd County Cutthroat. Well, the last letter in the series seemed to spell victory for him. October 30, 1986. To the corpse of the Poage Press. The vultures have fled, the rats scatter in the wind. Poage is a tomb, silent and empty, and I, the architect of its demise, claim my victory. You thought you could ignore me. You thought you could silence the truth. But the blood spoke louder than your ink-stained lies. Each scream echoed through the streets, a testament to your failure. Woolery, the pathetic pawn, thought he could control the tide. He built his digital empire, his monument to progress, on the backs of innocents. But I exposed the rot beneath the surface. I showed the people the price of their blind faith in technology. And they fled. They abandoned their homes, their jobs, their precious machines. They chose fear over progress, chaos over control. And in their flight, they delivered my message. The Poage press, the mouthpiece of the powerful, is now a relic. A tombstone marking the grave of a city that dared to embrace its own destruction. Your presses are silent, your words meaningless. The people have spoken, and they have chosen silence. But my work is not done. The disease of technology spreads, its tendrils reaching into every corner of the globe. I'll be there, a shadow in the code, a whisper in the wires. I'll remind them of their price of hubris. I'll show them the truth, even if it kills them. The future is analog. The future is chaos. The future is mine. The Boyd County Cutthroat. I returned the letters back to the folder and continued digging through the stack of papers that were unorganized and overflowing on the desk. I found a legal pad, and on it I found a few notes about the killer. The man, who the paper had identified as Ray Lee Dobbs, was a clerk at a local market, and he saw the writing on the wall. He was fearful that his line of work would be replaced by automation, and he began his killing out of both frustration and personal vendetta against Mayor Chuck Woolery. I found that the Poage Press were planning to publish a story revealing the identity of the killer, who had quit his job at the market and gone missing. The last known killing took place around the Poage Town Center Mall, and it was believed by the Poage Press that he primarily kidnapped his victims from this mall. Overwhelmed by the new information that I'd uncovered, I continued my journey. The mall was a long way to West Virginia, and a brilliant idea struck me like an atom bomb. I could sense that Ray Lee Dobbs was lurking in the shadows of the city. I could feel his presence, and I could lure him out into the open once again. I would kill him, put an end to the so-called madness. It was purely his metaphysical presence that was haunting this city and trapping us in this time warp. Putting an end to his reign of terror would free us from this eternal damnation. I power-walked down Winchester, this time with a newfound mission. I was dead set on making it happen, and nothing could stop me. In the distance, I saw movement. I continued walking down the empty street, and as I got closer to the movement, I realized it was a dog, who had noticed me too, growling from afar and growing defensive. I snapped back at the dog, shouting at it, as it began to run at me, its teeth showing and a foam erupting from its mouth. It was a large dog, had to have been a boxer, yet its ribcage was also evident. It sprinted at me full force and leapt at me while I winced and turned away from it. The dog didn't attack me. Instead, it flew above my head and vanished into the night as it continued ascending. The evil forces knew that I was close to unraveling their threads, and they were doing anything they could to stop me. Part 4. I made it to the mall, and the empty parking lot was reminiscent of the lore of liminal spaces that I'd read about on the internet. Vast and wide open, the lights in the middle of the parking lot were flickering. There were a few empty cars still parked in the same spots that they were in 1986. I walked into the department store on the tail end of the mall. Racks of oversized blazers and shoulder pads filled the store, along with sections of neon-colored leg warmers and windbreakers. I ventured through the store and into the main corridor of the mall, its pearl tiles and centerpiece fountain still functioning. Overhead, I heard the ambient sounds of music playing, and I quickly realized that the song in question was, again, Jubilee by Gene Ritchie. This time, it was more haunting than before. Heavy reverb from the wide-open walls was audible. I felt a strange sensation growing in my stomach. It wasn't pain, but it didn't feel particularly great either. It was a grumbling feeling of sickness. My body began to feel warm, and the sensation of being watched came back to me. As I was walking past the retail stores, I could feel the blank faces of the mannequins following me, tracing my movements. I turned to look at them once, and then their position had moved. Well, I wasn't imagining it. It was really happening. The wickedness was commanding their movement in an attempt to scare me away. Well, I wouldn't budge. Moseying my way down the main corridor, I finally made it out to the food court. A play area for children was set up in the center of the food court, and Jubilee kept repeating overhead. I went back into the kitchen of one of the restaurants, and a strange snot-like liquid covered the walls of the establishment. It was glowing in the dimly lit kitchen, and I could hear the bubbling. I looked around the kitchen and noticed a box with a caricature of a cow on it. It was a White's Meat Market box. I knew that I recognized that cartoon cattle, and immediately I connected the dots. The supermarket that the Poage press had talked about was White's Meat Market. That was where my answer lied, and that's where I was going to go to put an end to this madness. I walked back out into the food court, and then to the main corridor. As I was almost running through the mall, I noticed the music growing louder and more grim, and the lights in the building began to flicker. They went out one by one, and I was alone in the darkness, using the flashlight on my nearly dead phone to see what was in front of me. As I crept through the darkness, I heard a faint crying that was getting closer. A worrisome whisper. The crying reached a crescendo as a teenage girl appeared. She was running towards me, and her crying had become screaming at this point. Blood flowed from her neck, and her neon pullover was covered in it. She shrieked at me, and I determined that she was running from something. She was running from Ray Lee Dobbs. Or was this just another twisted trick that the town was trying to tackle me with? Perhaps this was just a lost soul that was trapped in this hellish place. Well, I didn't react to what I saw. I kept a blank stare, focused on getting out of that damned mall, and she ran past me like I wasn't even there. I could feel an immunity building up in my system now. I'd been in this town for a few hours, and I'd seen so much already. I was learning its ways and realizing that it only had the power to affect me if I let it. Non-reaction was the best policy by now. Well, I would free her eventually, but I had to make it to White's Meat Market first. Only then could I release these remembered souls from their eternal damnation. Yes, the wrath of Rayleigh Dobbs was going to come to an end at my hands, but not without a fight. The display windows of each store in the mall began to crack and explode, and the transparent ceiling that was designed to let the sun into the structure fell in, surrounding me with glass shards. I powered through them unharmed, but heard a loud roaring and saw flashes of bright lights. A thunderstorm had sprung, and the rain was starting to fall through the empty ceiling. As I made it to the entrance of the mall, I became aware that the mannequins had moved themselves yet again. This time they'd formed a wall in front of the entrance. A dozen or more mannequins, with their expressionless blank faces and their nude, featureless bodies, stood between me and that door. Their arms were raised up, resembling a push motion, and it was clear to me that I couldn't get through them without something going seriously wrong. Their hollow eyes made sure of that. Jubilee continued playing on the overhead speakers. I found myself displeased with the mocking nature of this scenario, yet surrendered myself to laughing when I realized the absurdity of it all. Overwhelmed by the surrealness of it, I stopped for a moment and gathered my thoughts. There were service exits along the sides of the mall, and I knew that I could make my escape through one of them, and so I did. I ran as fast as I could to the first service exit I could find and stormed my way through the doorway. The rain was pouring now, a torrential downpour resembling a waterfall all around the city. It fell in sheets. My sense of dread matched the intensity of this rainfall, and I was being hunted. Yes, I was prey, like a galloping gazelle in the deserts of Africa. Time was running out. I had to get to White's Meat Market before something more catastrophic happened. I worried about the lengths that this metaphysical spirit would go to keep me from ending its reign of terror. White's Meat Market, just a few blocks away from the Poage town centre, was visible from the mall under normal circumstances, but not right now. The pouring was too heavy, but I felt an undeniable pull towards that meat market. I put my camera back in my backpack to protect it against the water damage and ran as fast as I could to the meat market. The streets were flooding, and I found myself wading through multiple inches of water to make it to my destination. The overhead streetlights were flickering. I could feel the city resisting my presence. A white brick building. The meat market was surely a relic of the past, even in 1986. The stained glass windows were broken, scattered throughout the front of the building, and the front storm door was hanging off of its hinges, swaying in the extreme winds that were taking place in this fever dream. I made it to my destination and made my way into the meat market. And immediately, I was hit with an extreme stench. It smelled of something metallic, mixed with a heavy aroma of death and decay. It was nauseating. I felt a sickness growing in my stomach as I looked around the inside of the market, with its rotted meat and the corpses of the animals who'd been scavenging the leftovers. It was truly a gruesome scene. I decided to pull my camera back out and start snapping photos again. The room was dark, and my flash illuminated the grey walls. Each time I pressed the shutter button, a figure would appear in the flash. As I returned to look at my photos, I noticed a disturbing trend. The figure was coming towards me, yet I looked around and found nothing. My pounding heart and fearful face grew cold and sweaty. I continued looking around the meat market. In the back of it was a large metallic door, just slightly ajar. It was the door to the butcher's freezer, which was no longer operational. I walked inside of it and noticed strange symbols carved into the walls. They resembled those of the occult. Circles with geometric shapes in the middle, glowing in the dark dwelling. They seemed otherworldly. I took a few photos of them as the freezer grew more cold. The temperature had dropped dramatically. Frost was forming on the shelves, which I examined closely. I found the most disturbing sight in my entire duration here. A fresh body, its throat cut in the same manner as those of 1986. Stretching from ear to ear, the incision was new, and the blood was dripping like drops of ink. I realized that the Boyd County Cutthroat was still alive, lurking in the darkness. If he wasn't, then something much worse had clearly taken his place. I took a photo of the crime scene, and suddenly the door shut behind me. I was locked inside of the freezer, the temperature dropping more and more by the minute. The air became thick, and I heard a humming sound. For Jubilee by Gene Ritchie started playing yet again, but this time it was even more haunting than when I'd heard it in the mall. No, this time it was slower and pitched down by quite a few semitones, and it was playing from an unseen source. The distorted radio terrified me as I scanned the dark freezer, the walls of which were now starting to close in on me. I thought back to the words of the old man I'd encountered on Winchester Avenue. The time loop that he mentioned was collapsing in on itself, offended that someone dared to challenge it. I was being pulled deeper and deeper into Poage's twisted reality. As I was losing all hope, the defeatism taunted me. I sat down on the icy floor, accepting my fate. I was going to die in this place at the hands of the Boyd County Cutthroat, left forever roaming the solemn streets and warning wanderers about the dangers of the city. That's when I saw him, the same man that my father had seen so many years prior. It was Ray Lee Dobbs, his shadow peeking in through the bottom of the freezer door. The door opened, and I saw his silhouette, the light from the makeshift lamp surrounding his shape as he entered the freezer. As I looked closer, I could see that he'd aged significantly. Must have been in his 70s by now, and his face was gaunt, almost skeletal. His dead eyes, wrapped with his thick-rimmed glasses, glowed with a malevolent intelligence. His skin was wrinkly, and he still had the same goatee and long hair, which had grown grey over the years. He held a large silver butcher's knife in his hand, the blood flowing off of it like a river in flood. I could see my reflection in the weapon. I too had become old and wrinkled. My hair was white and my skin was saggy. Dark circles covered my eyes as if I hadn't slept in a decade. I looked terrible, and I felt even worse. Was I already dead? I pondered for a moment, and I determined that if I was dead, then I had nothing to lose by fighting his frightening behavior. I had to break free, and I had to defeat this metaphysical manifestation of the town's darkness. The battle was more than physical, it was spiritual, and I was a warrior. I charged at him like a raging bull seeing red, and he swung the knife at me with force, slicing my bicep, but not stopping me from tackling him. He tumbled to the ground, dropping the knife on the frozen floor, and we exchanged punches. With each landed hit, I could feel reality distorting around me. The freezer warped. The memories that preceded me flashed in my head like a strobe light. I was reliving Poage's past kill by kill and crime by crime. I didn't just harken back to the hellish murders, no. I saw it all, including the corruption at the hands of the local government. I saw my parents' faces, and I felt the worry they had for me. I wondered if I would ever see them again. We kept exchanging blows. I'll admit that I was taking my anger out on him, losing sight of my mission in the process. But I remembered that the goal wasn't to punish him. No, it was to kill him forever, and release the energy that hung over this city. With my knees on his arms, I reached over to the knife, grabbing it and smiling at him. My sinister grin grew, and I saw the fear consume his face, his eyes shifty and his heart pumping rapidly. I plunged the knife into his chest with the force of 1,000 suns, and blood erupted from the vessel before his body melted into a black, oily substance, seeping into the floor. I stumbled out into the meat market, my arm still bloody and my adrenaline still pumping. I walked outside and the rain had ceased. It was mostly dark, but the streets had dried up and the sky was clear. The streets were still eerily silent, yet I could see the sun over the horizon. Time had resumed its natural flow. I made my way back to Winchester Avenue, and as I looked across the river, I could see that the bridge was back. It was standing undamaged, as if the collapse had never happened at all. My body was weak, and I struggled to walk, but I trudged along back to the bridge and made my way across it. As I crossed the river, I noticed cars driving along the highway, and the sun was now high in the sky. Birds were chirping. My arm had healed, showing no signs of scarring. When I reached Ohio, my phone buzzed back to life. Not once or twice, but dozens of times. Messages from my girlfriend and parents blew up my phone, and the curse felt like it was lifted. I responded to their messages, letting them know that I was safe in my car, and began my journey back to Columbus. But not before looking back over my shoulder at the city. I looked at the top of the bridge again. The creature, now more visible in the day sunlight, looked over the city, paying no mind to me. As I sat in my car, waiting to get back on the road, I looked over the images I'd taken, the only proof I had of the darkness I'd experienced. The photos of the diner and bowling alley were still there. Photos of the mall were still there. Photos of the meat market were gone, though, as if the spirit of the city had wiped my memory card of the most disturbing things it had thrown at me. I started my car and headed back to Columbus, thankful that I'd made it out alive. As I talked to my parents about my experience, the trauma returned to me, and I made the decision to see a therapist and put the darkness behind me. In my journey to the abandoned city, I realized that Poage is best left a product of the past. While it was a life-changing experience, I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy, not even Ray Lee Dobbs himself. Life went on, and I eventually recovered from the trauma of the tumultuous experience. I continued taking photos in my free time, and I felt like I'd found my stride. My Instagram following exploded and Poage became an internet phenomenon, with thousands traversing to the town to take their own photos and explore it for themselves. But I'd moved on from it, but occasionally found myself scrolling through other users' photos of the city. Most of them were daytime shots, following the set of rules that I'd shared with my audience. One of the images stuck out to me though. A nighttime shot in a sea of sunshine. The photo felt strangely familiar. I looked closer at it, and I realized something. The photo was me. I could see my backside standing underneath the bridge. It was odd, because I'd never gone underneath a bridge. My tension grew as I read the caption below it. Forever. Well, my dear friends, what a weird and wonderful tale that was. That's why you never go camping to anywhere ever, on hikes. Well, that was weird, and you really enjoyed that one. Okay, a bit of suspension of disbelief that an entire Midwest American city would be left untouched for decades, but hey, let's just go with it. Made for a lot of fun and a roller coaster ride. Thoughts, feelings, and anything else you want to share in the comment section below the video, and as ever, I'll do my best to join in the conversation. That is it for me. Okay. Halloween's coming up, and I won't be here on this channel, but I'll be over doing a podcast, a big, huge one, several hours long, on my second channel. Also available anywhere where you tend to get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all these places. So if you haven't checked that out, basically I repackage stuff from my main channel thematically and release huge podcasts. So go over there and enjoy it. Okay, my dear friends. Well, before I go, happy Halloween, and till the next time, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.